This is a recording of Derech Hashem, of the Way of God, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. From here on in, we're going to experiment with working with Rabbi Kaplan's translation. That's in the Feldheim version, so I'll refer to the pages based upon that. We're about to start the third chapter of this first section, Perek Shlishi. That is called Min HaEnoshi. It's about humankind. We're also going to try, instead of reading the Hebrew, just trying to explain the concepts. See how that works. The first concept that he presents is actually a little bit striking. What he said, he makes reference to what he said before, which is that in order for this human being to be as similar to the Almighty as possible, it's necessary for this human being to be responsible for, it has to be, specifically the words that he uses are important, it's important to be precise. This being needs to acquire the tov that the Almighty wants to give to himself. But in order for that good to be his, says Rabbi Luzzatto in this beginning of this chapter, it's not sufficient that that being be forced to acquire the tov or be programmed to acquire that good. Instead, it has to be that he does it out of his own free will, because if this being was forced to acquire the good, so then it really wouldn't be that this being would be responsible for his acquiring the good. Instead, it would be the one who is making human beings acquire the tov. The forcer would be the one who is really responsible for that state. So the intention would not be accomplished unless human beings have free will. So to me, it's difficult to understand why it wasn't necessary to posit free will in the previous chapter, but Rabbi Luzzatto, I don't understand exactly why, but Rabbi Luzzatto does not understand that it is necessary to refer to free will. But the idea is, the nature of this idea of free will, the way he presents it, is that it's got to be that the person is put into a situation where they are equal, balanced, they have the possibility to go in each direction, and they're not forced to go in each direction, but something is pulling them to go in each direction, whether it's towards the good or towards the bad, whether it's towards God or away from God, so to speak. So therefore, a human being is created with an inclination to do good and to do evil. This is called they're created with a yetzer, an inclination, in both directions, and it is the human being's free choice to incline himself to whichever direction he wants. Next, Rabbi Luzzatto shares with us the idea that the way in which we are created with this inclination towards good and evil is not simply a matter of that we have a guy sitting on one shoulder and a guy sitting on the other shoulder. One is dressed in red, one is dressed in white. To whatever degree there might be some element of truth in that is interesting to discuss, but the way Rabbi Luzzatto describes this concept of this inclination towards good and bad is that the way the Almighty fulfilled this idea that he wanted us to be pulled in both directions is by his giving us, by making us a composite, a composition of two opposites, and that is the body, the physical body, and the soul. The physical body he describes as that it occludes, it blocks. It is somehow or other very much distinct, different, opposed to ruchnius, to spirituality, and then there's this soul component of us which pulls us upwards towards God, towards reality, towards truth. And there's a fight between these two, and the Adam, the human being, has the capacity to be able to direct, to incline themselves in towards one or towards the other. And when they do, in whichever way, let's say if they incline themselves towards the upwards, so they not only, the neshama is, not only is it that their souls, it goes upwards, but it is also, it lifts up the body in such a way so that the body itself becomes transformed to some degree so that it's no longer in the same way opposed to spirituality, and if they make the choice to go downwards, if the person makes the choice to go downwards towards to be pulled after their body, so not only does their body become more base, become more, it becomes, not only does it become more difficult for the person to get in touch with the spiritual part of themselves, but they also drag down the neshama, they drag down the soul along with them. The result would be that the person would be removed from the capacity to be able to receive that perfection, that wholeness, that completeness that the Almighty wants to give. And he finishes off by saying, and if I understand this is what he's saying even after a person does that, they still have the capacity to diminish the power of the physicality within them in order, with the power of their reason, their capacity to perceive reality, and their neshama and their soul, and to acquire and nevertheless to get beyond that and to get back to the process of acquiring completeness, wholeness, perfection, the good that the Almighty wants. In paragraph 3, Rabbi Luzzatto says that the Almighty established that there should be a limitation to the amount of effort that's necessary to put in for a person to acquire the completeness, the wholeness, which is a very significant novel concept. To say that there should be a limitation, why shouldn't it just be that, in a certain sense, it's infinite, isn't it? Nevertheless, even though it could have been infinite, the process, but nevertheless there is a limitation that is expected of us, and if we can make that cut, that will make the difference as to whether or not we are capable of getting to a point where we'll be able to repose in a state of pleasure, ecstasy, whatever you want to call it, for eternity. So it doesn't have to be that we have to be perfect in order to get to benefit from the eternity. But there's a limit in that process of how much we are supposed to, we're capable or supposed to achieve and accomplish. And then once we get there, so then there's the next phase. There's the next. So therefore, there are two different times, the way he describes it. One of them is the time to work, and the second time is the time to receive the reward that the Almighty wants to give to us. But the nature of good is greater than the nature of evil, and so therefore the necessary darkness that we need to be plunged into in order to have the capacity to be able to work is limited. There's a limited amount of time where we're capable of doing that, and that is a kindness of Hashem, and the period of receiving the reward is boundless, is eternal. So after which a point a person would be able to experience for eternity the benefits, the pleasure that they acquired, that they incorporated into themselves. So these two different phases of history, there's the phase where we're supposed to put in the effort, the work, the toil, and then the second phase, that the period during which we receive the reward, we need to be constructed differently. Our composition needs to be different in each of those phases, because in order for us to have to face the challenge whereby we have the opportunity to accomplish, to acquire, to incorporate into ourselves the good that Hashem, that the Almighty wants us to incorporate into ourselves. It's necessary that we, during that first phase, be built in a way where there isn't too much light of the Almighty in us, accessible to us, because even though it sounds like that's a good thing, that we should have more light available to us, but in context of what it is that the Almighty wants from us during that phase, it would not be good, because we wouldn't be able to accomplish that which the Almighty wants us to accomplish. If there would be too much light, then we would be overwhelmed by that light, and we would not have free choice. We would be forced, because of the clarity of that light, we would be forced to make choices. And if we're forced to make those choices, then there's no free will. So we need to be in a state, in a certain sense, of darkness during that first phase, as opposed to the next phase. That state of darkness and the and the degree to which the physicality has a very strong influence upon us, that is contradictory to that next phase, because the next phase is about experiencing, reaping the benefits of the choices that we made. The nature of those benefits are that connection to the Almighty, and our having the darkness that gives us the capacity to have free will is going to block us from being able to to experience the light, the goodness, the perfection, the tov that we have incorporated into ourselves. So whereas before the Rabbi Luzzatto distinguished and said there need to be two separate times, so now he says, based upon what he just established about the different needs of each of those times, then he says it's necessary to create two worlds. They're referred to as Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba, this world and the world to come. Not necessarily saying that they're different places, but they're different worlds in the sense that they are radically distinct from each other in terms of our composition and the composition of and the relationship between the physical and the spiritual. Each one of them, this world and the world to come, need to be constructed in such ways that they will accomplish the purposes that the Almighty intends, namely to give the person the opportunity to earn the reward, to work hard, and then subsequent to that is the place where a person has the opportunity to reap the benefits, to experience the full goodness of the choices that they made. So we're up to chapter or section, paragraph, let's call it paragraph 5.